you are listening to The Wellness Project. I'm your host, Des, and this is episode 107. Hello, thank you so much for being here with me today. Today's episode is one I think we can all benefit from listening to. I am speaking with Sara Gita Flores, and she shares her story of how her voice was shamed and silenced after trauma. Now, I do want to give a bit of a trigger warning here for sexual assault. Sara was sexually assaulted twice, which she talks about a little bit. She doesn't get into the details, but I just wanted to let you know that ahead of time. If you've ever felt silenced or shamed or humiliated or ignored, if you've ever felt like your voice was small or unimportant, then I want you to listen to this episode and really hear Sara's story and listen to the advice she gives and how she reclaimed her voice and gained confidence in her voice and learned that her voice is valuable. Like I said, I think this is such an important episode for everyone to hear because at one time or another, our voices have been silenced, and that is not a good feeling. I think you're going to get a lot out of this episode. Help me welcome Sara. Sara, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Des, for having me on.
Oh, absolutely. I'm really looking forward to speaking with you today. So to get us started, can you just introduce yourself and share some of your story for me and our listeners today?
So I came to mental health and well-being and the work that I do as a vocal empowerment coach from the experience of having my voice silenced and shamed, which, happened in many ways growing up female in a patriarchal society, but certainly the most impactful incident was through sexual assault. So as a 5-year-old child at a friend's house, I was sexually assaulted by my friend's dad. And because of his threats and also because of not feeling like I really had the safety to speak up about it, I really shut down and narrowed my self-expression. And everything was focused on pleasing others in order to stay safe. As a child growing up, this kind of turned into a form of perfectionism where I needed to be perfect so I could really manage people's perceptions of me so that they wouldn't criticize me, they wouldn't make me feel unsafe. And I was also sexually assaulted as a 15-year-old, so I have kind of different experiences of a child and a teenager. And the perfectionism and pleasing others to stay safe really kind of came to a head when I was 19. And I was a piano major in college, and I started experiencing a lot of pain in my hands and wrists, and I couldn't play the piano anymore. The pain was a wake-up call to start looking within and start healing, which has really been a multi-decade long journey. I see how the seeds of my voice being silenced through trauma really laid the foundation for me to reclaim my voice, reclaim my right to be heard, and also to start to understand why the world does need my voice to be empowered and to share my gifts with others. Because, in my 20s, as I was going through my healing, doing a lot of therapy, yoga, and meditation, I started to feel the call to share my music because I'm a singer, and I had shifted my focus from piano to singing in college as my major. And I started writing songs with, beautiful, uplifting messages, and really experiencing that same pattern of like a not being heard, feeling like nobody wants to listen to me, and that it wasn't safe to let myself really receive the attention for expressing myself authentically and sharing my voice with the world. Through the journey of trauma, silence, shame, healing through many years, a lot of therapy, a lot of inner work, and just cultivating more self-compassion, more resource, more connection to everything that lights me up, I have gradually started this becoming my work as well, because I started the first 10 years of my career as just a traditional singing teacher. And over the past 6 years, I've been bringing in all of the healing aspects to formulate, more like develop and let emerge a body of work that's about healing the voice and healing your capacity to be seen and heard, even when it feels like nobody really wants to listen, even when your voice has been dismissed or interrupted or disrespected, or you've just gone into a room and sensed that like people value the voices of other people more than you, which might be because of your gender, might be because of how you look, might be because of your race, your ability, other factors like that. But I would say that my story is a living proof that we can heal, and that all of us in our empowered, healed, most aligned selves, expressing ourselves and sharing our gifts is healing for the world.
Sara, thank you so much for sharing that. I'm so sorry that you experienced those sexual assaults, but your story really is amazing. How now you help others find their voice. And thank you for sharing that. I love that you do the work that you do. It's so, so important. I think a lot of people struggle with their voice and sharing their voice, whether it's through trauma or low self esteem, or as children also, we're told to be quiet all the time. Children are constantly told to lower their voices, to shut up, things like that. So
Yeah.
I think along our journey, and I think with growing up, we're taught in school and at home to be quiet constantly. So I think a lot of people along the way lose their voices through whatever experience. You lost your voice, you were keeping yourself small and everything through your sexual assaults from those. I know you mentioned that you struggled with perfectionism and physical pain. Are there any other ways that the sexual assaults impacted your mental health?
Definitely depression and anxiety. I, have gone through the kind of frequent triggers in the past. So before I really acknowledged to myself that what happened to me was sexual assault, and in the case of the 5-year-old incident, that was a repressed memory. So on some level, I always knew, but the memories were really fragmented. They were really, and this is common for people who experience childhood trauma, that it was really a lot more sensation based. Like it was a sensation of constriction in my throat, of not being able to breathe, things like that. And I didn't have the language to call it a trigger or to really tie it back to anything, but I experienced it, in my teens and early 20s as just uncontrollable crying fits, just feeling like really thrown off balance by things that were, I would say, warranted some kind of emotional reaction, but just the amount that I would be taken out by, say, someone criticizing one or suggesting that I change one line of my song. Like the amount that I would be thrown off balance by that was out of proportion to the incident itself, right? So I would say that the triggers were definitely present. And, through therapy, I started to have the acknowledgement of to myself that the traumas were traumas, that they were deeply impactful, and that it started to make sense. Like I started to connect the dots, like, oh, well, that's why I got so triggered by this, or got, so very upset by this, because it reminded me of a sensation from an earlier time when I really was not safe. Yeah, depression, anxiety, the triggers, I have experienced them all. Definitely, I do feel a lot more over the past 5-6 years, a lot more cultivation of resilience and things like really being able to handle any triggers if they arise, feeling like I have the tools and resources, like I can have compassion for myself when they arise. There was a time when I really, really thought I had to be 100% healed to move forward. And I thought that would mean I would never get triggered. And it was a huge turning point for me. Again, it was about 5 or 6 years ago when I was in therapy, and I had been doing a lot of EMDR. Previously, I also did somatic experiencing and really loved both modalities. And I just said to my therapist, like, maybe I'm not going to get to where I never get triggered. And maybe that's not the goal. And she was like, yeah, maybe it's just knowing like you can handle it if anything arises. Like, and certainly the proportion of how I get triggered is not at all as doesn't feel nearly as out of control or as big as it used to. So, I feel like we all have to define healing for ourselves and find out what it feels like in our body to be healed. And, it doesn't mean that we're in some perfect state where like, oh, I'll never, ever have anxiety or depression again or any mental health challenges. A lot of it is really about the resilience in my mind.
That is such a great point. I love that you said that maybe we don't have to be 100% healed to move forward, because I think with healing we do get kind of stuck in that idea that I'm not healed enough yet to be successful or to be worthwhile or valuable. Like, I'm not healed enough to do the things I want to do. But that's such a good point. Maybe we just have to heal a little bit to move forward and recognize that, hey, I have these triggers, I recognize them, and maybe I could just be able to get to the point where I'm able to deal with them a little bit better, or be a little less triggered, or at least just recognize them. So I really like that you brought that up. That's such a great point. When it came to restricting yourself and your voice and making yourself smaller, why do you think you wanted to stay small and restrict your voice in reaction to those sexual assaults? Everybody obviously has different reactions and different things they experience because of the trauma. Why do you think that was your reaction?
As a child, I feel like my parents were loving parents, and there was definitely that element of like the being quiet is like we like things to be calm in this house. And I definitely received praise for the things that were pleasing, and did not receive praise for things that were stirring up emotions for my parents. One aspect of my unconscious decision to do this small and hide my true self, hide my inner world, I think is that I saw there was still a way for me to be seen in my family, and that was by being good. Another aspect is that, as a 5-year-old, when an adult threatens you, you don't really have any framework to know that they're out of line. Unless you've had some really great parenting, which, in the 80s when I was growing up was not really on people's radars. But I think it's starting to be more on more parents' radars to say, like, nobody has a right to touch your body if you don't want them to. And if anybody ever does make you feel unsafe, you talk with me. So as a parent now, I do see there's more access to those resources, maybe not as widespread as I want them to be, but it's like a child needs something to grab onto, and I really had no way of knowing that he was lying and that it wasn't my fault. So that is another piece, is just that I believed his threats because I didn't have any other framework. And it wasn't until I was an adult that I could really unravel that and understand that I am worthy and it's not my fault. And I think the third aspect of why I unconsciously chose smallness is that freeze was the response that my body went into. That has been my default response. And, with a freeze response, it's not a cognitive decision. It's just your nervous system assessing, like, we're going to numb out, so hopefully we won't feel as much pain, and we're going to try to stay silent. It's like a playing dead so that maybe it'll get over faster and we will be harmed less. I have a lot of compassion for myself now, looking back and understanding this. That I know that certainly with the assault that I experienced at age 15, there were times when I was like, why didn't I scream or run away? Like I kept saying no, but he didn't respect that. I just have to look back, and I think a lot of survivors have to do this and say, you know what? It was not a cognitive decision. It's just that my body went into freeze. It's just what my intelligence system did to preserve my safety. So smallness was safety for my system.
Thank you for sharing that. And I can relate to that a little bit too, because my response was also freeze, which, I've learned over the years that no fault of my own, like you said, it's just our nervous systems, but I'm not good in emergency situations and things like that. So I think that's important to recognize as well and give ourselves some grace with that, is that it is our bodies, it is our minds trying to protect us in its own way. And sometimes we wish that it was a different way. Like I know that recently I said to somebody, my response is a freeze response and I really hate it. I wish I was more of a fight response. But they said, well, be kind to yourself because that's your body trying to protect you. And I was like, no, you know what? You're right. I think it is important to recognize that. I think it helps when we realize that and we're aware of that. Like you said, you now understand your body. You were trying to protect yourself, and to give ourselves some kindness with that. So I think that's important to be aware of.
Yeah, absolutely. I hear you on that, right? Like, we kind of can easily feel shame about the freeze because it seems so passive, but it's just like, yeah, it's a nervous system just doing what it can.
Yep, and we can't choose it. I do think in
Yeah.
in situations you can, if you do want more of that fight response or something, there are things you can do, I think, to strengthen other areas of your responses. But when it comes down to it, it's almost, a reflex. There's not much we can do, but there are different things I think people can do to strengthen those other reflexes, because I think we all have a little bit of all of those responses within us, but there's only so much we can do when it really comes down to those situations.
Yeah, for sure. Yes, I know. And in terms of healing, I know for myself, like relating to the tiger and energy of these really strong predators and animals, and they are aspects of us. So yeah, I relate to that also.
Yeah, definitely. You experienced these sexual assaults when you were 5 and 15. You had this unconscious response to keep yourself small, to keep yourself quiet, to protect yourself. Where is the turning point? At what point did you realize that, I know you said you were in therapy for a while and you realized that you had experienced trauma. So at what point did you realize you needed to start healing, to get into therapy? And at what point did you realize that music and singing actually helped you to heal as well?
It's interesting because when I was 19 and was experiencing pain in my wrist, that was kind of the first little pivot because I started to orient more towards looking within. And it was kind of the beginning of my self-love journey. I would say that there was about a year. So I was 23 and I had been very recently married. I fell in love in Mexico. I'm still married to my husband, but it was a young age to get married, even though I knew, and I still know that it is the right partnership for me. At that point, I had a friend who revealed to me that she was raped. It really made me think, and I said, I was too. And that was one of the first times that I really acknowledged to myself that I began with healing what I experienced as a 15-year-old, because that was, the memories were accessible. They were always right there, never repressed. And that was a major turning point. But there was a year where, I started telling more of my close female friends, and some of them were able to respond, and some of them were like, really unhelpful. I mean, another friend said, oh yeah, I've had tons of situations like that. It's no big deal. To which my jaw dropped. And it's kind of like sad for her and also very dismissive of what I was sharing. And we were young and there was so much that we didn't really know or have the capacity to acknowledge. And so during that year when I was sharing it with more people, I was getting more frequently triggered and having those crying bits. And I was very lucky that my husband was the one who encouraged me to go to therapy. He printed out a list of local therapists who worked with trauma. One of them turned out to be an amazing fit. And I protested. I was like, but we hardly have any money. We're like living in our 1-bedroom apartment with a 1970s fridge. And he was like, it's worth it because, if you don't feel like good, then what's the point of spending money on anything else? And so I was so lucky that he really encouraged me to get support. I had done a little bit of therapy in college, more focused on depression. And so the decision to say I'm going to start healing the trauma in therapy was a big turning point for me. And as far as the other part of your question, how music and singing helped me to heal my voice. I think that thread was always there because playing piano as a child was one of the ways that I felt like a little sliver of my true self could be seen and heard, but it was an abstract way, right? Because if you're sharing a piano song, you don't need to do words, it was just like this little window for safe self-expression. Then that grew when I started singing as an older teen. The healing was really amplified for me when I started writing songs, because through writing, it gave me a way to transform some of my pain into art. And it's a really beautiful alchemy when you don't have to write songs or even be a writer, but if you can sit and write a really free-form poem or scribble on a page or find a way that what you're feeling inside can go from just swirling inside and being trapped to seeing like, here's a through line, an outlet for some of this to come out into words or into scribbles on a page or movements through my body. Then it goes from just being kind of trapped and stifled to like, I'm feeling the pain and I'm present with it. But there's also this like place for it to go, that it doesn't have to be this repressive weight that I can't get rid of. It's like, yeah, it hurts and I feel it, but I can also express it in a way that's meaningful. And there's a real alchemy that happens through self-expression as healing.
Oh, that's so great. I absolutely love how supportive your husband was. That's so amazing. And I think that's so important to have supportive people in your life for your healing process, because healing sometimes takes other people in our lives too, right? Sometimes it is a lot of inner work, but that support is so helpful in that healing journey. So I'm so glad that you had your husband to push you to go to therapy. And that's so sweet that he printed out the list of therapists. That is just so amazing.
Yeah, it is. I'm really grateful for that. Yeah. And
Oh,
it doesn't mean we have a perfect relationship or, I always get that perfect support, but he has been very supportive of me really prioritizing my mental health. And I'm so grateful for that because having support people in your life who really value and encourage you and want you to heal is so invaluable.
definitely. And so you brought up another point I want to touch on, is that you did start sharing your sexual assaults a lot with friends and people in your life, and they would either be dismissive or kind of minimize the experience. So I think a lot of times when people share something like that or share stuff, I know it happens a lot with grief. People just don't know what to say. Do you
Yeah.
have any sort of advice for people? Like, what would have been helpful for you to hear? I think a lot of times people just, they're not trying to be unhelpful, but they get uncomfortable. They don't know what to say. So what could you tell people that might be helpful when somebody comes to them with something traumatic?
One of the biggest pieces is just to say, I see you and I hear you. And to be willing to be a witness because I have a big fixer tendency, and I know a lot of people who feel other people's pain also have that tendency of like, I just want to fix this for you, right? Like, I just want to kind of wrap it up and say, well, here's what you need, or to say, well, God always has a lesson for you, or just, say some kind of platitude, like, or give you advice and be like, there, now you can feel better so that I can feel better. It is a really open hearted and vulnerable thing to be able to sit with someone when they're in pain. I think that if it's uncomfortable, it's okay to say, I see you and I hear you, and I'm recognizing that this is bringing up discomfort in me, which is mine. And the other important question is, how can I support you? And, to have compassion for these, because I remember a situation also when I said to a friend, we were traveling and a guy on a bus next to her was super skeezy and really inappropriate. And I was like, why didn't you just get up? Like doing that sort of unconscious, basically blaming her, right? Like, why didn't you get up and move away? Which goes back to our conversation of how I, treated myself around freeze, being like, why didn't you do something, take action, run away, yell, do anything, right? We have to have compassion for ourselves, like looking back, if you've ever had a friend who's shared something difficult and you feel like you didn't do a great job of supporting them, to understand that you did what you could with the knowledge you had then. And now you can step more into that role of being a witness and really asking them what they need. And another really important piece is refraining from judgment. So you might have judgments in your head. That's okay. You might also feel like, why is this such a big deal to this person? This seems like tiny. So that's the kind of thing also to just, okay, well, that thought comes up, thoughts come and go. I don't need to voice it to somebody who's in distress, right? Because the other thing to keep in mind is that if something seems really small, it may be that it's bringing up a feeling of a much larger incident. And the person is not really connecting those dots, or they're not really sharing that, feeling ready to share that full aspect with people. That also points to something that I learned from my journey, which is that you don't have to share with everyone. For me, I, after many years came to the place where I felt like it was part of my calling to share my story. And that only came really when I felt enough healing and coherence and resilience and confidence inside to say, I do want to share my story, because I know, 1 in 4 women have experienced rape. That's a huge number. So I do feel like it's part of collective healing for me to share my story. But if something is fresh, if it's bringing up a lot of triggers, like sharing with one safe person can be the perfect place to start. And if you have access to a therapist or a really well-trained coach, if you have a friend who will be able to meet you with some compassion. Also, anonymous crisis lines. People are trained to have a non-judgmental, supportive response. So I think that rather than doing what I did, which is feeling like I just have to tell everybody, if that's what you feel called to, that can be powerful. But, you really start with like one safe person, then maybe a few more, if that feels good. Like it doesn't have to be that if there's something that's really raw inside, it doesn't mean you're being inauthentic. If you are just being kind of discerning about when and where and how to share that about yourself.
That's great advice. Thank you for sharing that. So, for people that struggle after a traumatic experience with their confidence, can you share how you started gaining confidence in yourself after your sexual assaults?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that a baseline fundamental first step would be some nervous system repair. And that usually happens in a therapeutic container. And that's allowing your nervous system to access its safety, its kind of baseline of like, okay, this is a well-functioning nervous system that's not constantly spinning in the fight or flight or freeze. I do feel like finding a therapeutic modality that focuses on healing trauma, if you have a shock trauma history, can be really important. And also if you have experienced the kind of trauma of like ongoing microaggressions, there might not have been a specific incident, but there have been a lot of incidents of discrimination, of people devaluing you. Building some more resilience in your nervous system can be a fundamental step. And if people have experienced trauma, I typically work with them after there has been some, basic nervous system repair. It doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to be many years, but just being able to access more of that sense of resilience in yourself. A really powerful tool that I do is writing and then reading it aloud with safe others. I know that for myself, I wanted to go straight from like, okay, now I'm ready to share my voice with the world. Everybody listen. In 2018, I shared my story of overcoming sexual trauma as giving a closing keynote for a conference. There were at least 500 people in the audience, and that was the first time I had shared my story, So I don't recommend that you go like big all the way, because the nervous system likes incremental change. If you, for example, write out your story, or write out a little poem, or write out an affirmation, or write out the realization that it's not my fault, and then you share it with one safe person, such as a coach or a friend who can really celebrate you for it, then what you're doing is you are giving yourself the experience of speaking up, even if you don't feel the confidence yet, but you're speaking up and having it be heard and safe. So you're giving your nervous system, your whole body, this experience of like, yeah, it's safe to speak up. It's safe to share my truth. And then you continue with that incremental sharing in whatever way you feel called. It might not be through words. It might be through, dance, movement, art. It might be through organizing a get-together or something. There's all different ways that you can express yourself. To basically summarize my answer, building confidence, and especially building confidence in your voice, is a combination of inner healing and outer doing. And the outer doing is actually doing the thing that you feel called to do, or that feels scary or edgy, but doing it in a way that's really thoughtful and safe, so that you're not just going to the like, here I am world, maybe I'll fail, maybe I'll succeed. The confidence comes from doing it and seeing that you can handle it, that you have the resilience to do this. And I do think in the beginning, it's important to do it with safe people, so you have that experience of success, because then it gives you the knowing that that's possible. Because as you start to grow more and more, putting yourself out there more and more, there's going to be times that don't feel quite as successful. For me, I do a lot of speaking, and it feels like it is part of my calling on podcasts, events, all kinds of things. But, when I reach out to a place, I don't get a yes every time. So having had the experience of being successful, knowing that what I have to share does have value for the people who are meant to receive it, which is, not every single person, but really the people who resonate with it. That combination of inner healing with outer doing and being aware of the we tend to look at confidence and outer doing like, oh no, I had a failure, and so I feel less confident, and that means I'm not good at speaking, or whatever it may be that you wish to bring to the world. Through the process of both inner healing and outer doing, that really the confidence is in your resilience. It's in your ability to handle whatever comes up. Me having confidence in my voice is not the confidence that every single person will always say yes and will always like me, right? It's the confidence that I know I have value. I know that I have a purpose and that I can express that through my being and through my voice. And I have the confidence that I can handle the setbacks and the failures.
This is so important to talk about because, like I said earlier, I think so many people struggle with valuing their voice, having confidence in their voice, really struggling with the idea that they have something important to say, that people care about what they say. So I think this is so important to mention. And I know that you talked about earlier that you were able to cultivate your resilience. Can you share that a little bit? Because I like how you tied that resilience into that confidence.
So for me, I'm somebody who finds it very easy to spiral in my head. So connecting to resource has been really one of the simplest but also most impactful ways that I've built my resilience. So a resource, if you're not super sure about that term, it's really anything that helps you feel calm and safe and stable. A resource can be something external. It can be looking at a tree in your yard or your favorite plant or holding a stone or a small object. A resource can be internal. Like I work a lot with my wise adult aspects, who is, a divinely connected part of me. That is the caretaker of all my tender and scared parts. So very much inner child kind of model. So connecting to that part of me. See, I feel it right now. who is wise and open and caring and non-judgmental towards myself. Resources can also be like feeling your feet on the ground or feeling your sits bones in the chair. Resources can also be practices like taking a walk, doing yoga, journaling. The way that I have built the most resilience in my life has been by really emphasizing these resources. And part of the reason I stayed in therapy so long was I used to think my healing was in always wrestling with the difficulty. And I just kept myself spiraling, like digging up more aspects of the childhood trauma, more memories, like, wanting the full story. And it really trained my brain. My neural pathways were going so much into the anxiety. And while I really still do value wrestling with difficulty, I see how it's so much more effective when you start and always come back to resource, because that's what gets you into accessing a healed state within you. That's what gets you into knowing what feeling good feels like. Because otherwise you can just stay looping forever and ever in the wrestling with the difficulty and having all the aha moments about my childhood or this experience or why I believe this or why I feel anxious. And there's a lot of value in that, but the resource needs to be an even stronger presence. It needs to be the anchor that you can come back to, so that there's kind of like a balance and a dance between the dancing with the pain, but really knowing that your true nature is resilience. Your true nature is health and feeling good.
Oh, great. That's really, really great. Thank you so much for this, Sarah. This has been so, so helpful and such an important conversation. Do you have any last words of wisdom or advice for our listeners?
Yeah, I think on that thread, I want every single person to know that you are worthy, you matter, and your voice matters. The world needs your voice. Not necessarily because you have to become Oprah, although that may be in the cards for you, but truly because your empowerment, your well-being, and your feeling good in your body and your being is healing for the world. Not because you have to do anything, but because you embody well-being and self-compassion and all these things. You're anchoring it, you're making it more alive. The health and well-being and consciousness becomes more alive just by you embodying it.
I love that, and I fully agree. Sara, thank you so much for being here today and sharing your story and having this important conversation with us. Can you please tell our listeners where they can find you?
Yes, thank you so much, Des. It's been an amazing conversation. So, my website is saragita.com. It's Sara, and there's two I's in Gita, so it's a little unusual. It's GIITA.com. And on my website, I have a free resource that I really encourage people to check out if they're interested in building confidence in their voices. It's called the Powerful Voice Toolkit, and it's MP3 practices and a PDF guide. And I love for people to reach out to me as well at saragita.com. So thank you so much.
Oh, great. And I definitely want to check that out as well. Everyone, I'm going to have that link in the show notes. So definitely go check out Sara. Sara, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Des, for being so open hearted and asking the deep questions. I really appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. This has been really great. And I know it's going to be such a valuable episode for our listeners to hear. I think Sara's story is such an important one and such a powerful one because, like we said, as we grow up when we're children, our voices are constantly silenced. We're always told to shut up, be quiet, be small, be invisible. I even worked at a job. I was completely horrified. I worked at an elementary school, and I've talked about this job a little bit in the past because it was just such a toxic position and it really negatively impacted my mental health. But I worked at an elementary school with kids between pre K and fifth grade. And I went into the cafeteria because I had lunch duty. And an older lady, I don't know what her position was at the school. I think she was a lunch monitor or a lunch lady, whatever her position was. But I was sitting there just observing the kids, and it was really quiet. The cafeteria did not look like what you would picture for an elementary school cafeteria. And this older lady comes up to me and she says, "Ah, just how it should be. Children being seen, not heard." I just kind of looked at her and I gave like a little awkward chuckle, but that really didn't sit right with me at all. And it's always bothered me. And this was years ago. This was like 4 years ago. And it's still something that I remember because children should be heard. Children's voices are important. And it really bothers me that children are constantly told to be quiet and that we grow up with this message that our voices aren't important, that we don't have anything valuable to say. And I loved talking with Sara today because even though I have this podcast and I'm pretty active on social media, I still struggle with that, feeling like my voice is valuable, feeling like people want to hear what I have to say. I get very insecure about that. And it's something that I struggle with regularly. And I don't like sharing that because I don't like really being vulnerable in that way. But I want to be honest with you that even somebody that has a podcast and is very active on social media and is posting videos regularly, that even I really struggle with that, with the idea that, hey, maybe my voice is valuable. Maybe I do have something important to say. I do get those negative thoughts that what I have to say isn't important and isn't worthwhile and is worthless. And I wonder if that is from growing up in that way. I don't exactly know where that stems from, but maybe that is something that I should explore. And if you feel similarly, maybe you should explore that as well. I really hope that you enjoyed this episode, and I just want you to know that your voice is important, your voice is valuable, and I know that you can gain the confidence to share your voice with the world. Sara, thank you so much for being here today. This was such an important and powerful conversation. I will see you all next week with another incredible guest.